Well, thank you all for being here. I'm really glad you've come. And this is the second part of, we're just doing a little travelogue, and I thought it would be fun just to go through and look at some pictures and see if we can just orient a little bit visually to some things in the scripture. And so I hope you enjoyed it. Last week I had several people tell me they did, and that made me feel really good. So we're going to do that today again. We're going to go through fairly fast. I don't have time to just stop at each one and go into all kinds of details, but I think the more you understand the geography and the space of the Bible, the more the Bible starts to come alive. You see things in there that you didn't see before. If you ever get a chance to go to Israel, for sure go. I can't think of any place in the world that's more important to go to, even Germany. You can go to Israel, you'll just get so much more out of it. So we did some Old Testament yesterday, and we're picking up now with David, who was the second king. And at the time of David, what is today Jerusalem was ruled by a group called the Jebusites. And so under David, Jerusalem was conquered, the Jebusites were defeated, and David made Jerusalem his capital, which it's been now all of this time. So you can get a nice picture of that here. You see how it's up high? This is like, see where the walls are? That's the old city. This is all Jerusalem, but the old part of the city where the walls are, see how it's up on an elevation? That's how they would build their cities back then, to make it more defensible. And we're going to fast forward through almost all the Old Testament except for one quick story that I want to tell you about, which I think is so fascinating. And it's in the time of Hezekiah. So we fast forward from David 300 years. And so in the year 701, Israel is surrounded by these big empires. So on this map, all the green and the blue is controlled by the evil Assyrian Empire. And the Assyrians were very harsh. They ruled by terror. They would cut people's heads off and put them on pikes. And they were the first ones that invented crucifixion. The Romans perfected it, but the Assyrians invented it. They tortured people terribly until you were so frightened of them, they wanted people to surrender rather than fight back. And that's how their empire expanded. But of course, the other empire that you had to consider at the time was the Egyptian Empire down here. Well, what's in the middle? Yeah, Israel, of course, right? Israel's always in the middle of everything. And so in the time of Hezekiah, the king who was in charge of Philistia down here sided with the Egyptian king and rebelled against the Assyrians. And so Israel, Judah, really, we're talking about Judah, which is right next to it here, kind of got swept up in that. And so the Assyrian king, the emperor, came down with a great big huge army against Jerusalem. Oh, I thought I had it working. No, don't tell me. Oh dear. Yeah, it went to the wrong thing. All right. So this is a close-up now of Judah, and Sennacherib is coming down here. He defeats the Philistine army and the joint Egyptian and Cushite army. And what do they do when they lose? They go back to Egypt, right? So who's left alone sitting here, right? Poor Judah. So the Assyrian army comes down. It's taking one city after another, and it's working its way back up to Jerusalem, and they besiege Jerusalem. There's fascinating stories in the Bible about this. I'm just going to read you a few verses, okay? This is from 2 Chronicles 32. After these things and these acts of faithfulness, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and invaded Judah and encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them for himself. And when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and intended to fight against Jerusalem, he planned with his officers and his mighty men to stop the water of the springs that were outside the city, and they helped him. A great many people were gathered, and they stopped all the springs and the brook that flowed through the land, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find much water?" He set to work resolutely and built up all the wall that was broken down, raised towers upon it, and outside he built another wall. And he strengthened the Millo and the city of David. He also made weapons and shields in abundance, set commanders over the people, said he could be strong and courageous. And it goes on the story about how Sennacherib comes down with this great big army. He conquers everything, destroys everything except Jerusalem. He's all around Jerusalem. And there's an extra biblical reference where he's even bragging about how he's conquered this city and that city. And he says, Hezekiah is like a bird in a gilded cage. Remember I showed you how Jerusalem looks all golden in the sunlight? So you could picture Hezekiah in the walls of Jerusalem and the sun's shining off it. It looks all golden, but he's trapped in there, and his people. He's not getting out. There's nothing he's going to do. Now, there's also a couple chapters in Isaiah that you should read about this. Isaiah, I think it's 36 and 37 to tell the story. But this is how the story ends. Then Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, prayed because of this and cried to heaven. And the Lord sent an angel who cut off all the mighty warriors and commanders and officers in the camp of the king of Assyria. So he returned with shame of face to his own land. And when he came into the house of his God, some of his own sons struck him down there with the sword. So the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Now I'm probably just doing this briefly. Terrible injustice to not help you realize what this was. I mean, this is a huge, huge empire against one little city. And Hezekiah strengthened the walls and he built it up and but the odds are incredible here. If you were voting, it should be 1,000,000,000. And God saved Jerusalem. It's amazing. But there's some other neat things about this. One of the things that Hezekiah did, if you're going to be trapped inside a city, what do you need? There's a big army outside, you can't get in or out. What do you need?
Food and water.
Food and water, right. And water's the big thing. So one of the things Hezekiah did was he built a huge tunnel. So in the city, he built a tunnel from a place where there's a natural spring, and he ran it underground. So it came out inside the wall, so they would have access to water inside the walls. Remember I showed you the map of Israel. When the rains would come on Israel, most of the rain, especially in the half of the country to the west, would run off into the sea. But some of it would seep into the ground, would go down into an aquifer, and wherever that aquifer had places where it popped up in the rest of the land, those were where the springs were. Remember I showed you, they had to live where there was water. You couldn't build a city where there was no water. So they were limited to the few places where there were springs. Well, how did Jerusalem get started as a city in the first place? There's a spring there. So that spring is, how do you say this, Dad? The Gihon or Gihon spring, right?
Gihon, yeah.
Gihon. So the Gihon spring was the natural spring where they could get water. So what Hezekiah did was he built a tunnel from the Gihon spring into the pool of Siloam inside the wall. So they had access to fresh water while they were under siege. That's incredible. There's a picture inside the tunnel. Remember, they built this in 701 BC. They built this thing. Now, Dad, you've been in it, haven't you?
Yeah.
My dad's been in there. That could be him, right behind that. I haven't been in there. I do let you go in. It's my understanding that depending on how high the spring is, sometimes the water still actively flows through the spring to this day, right?
Water, we were told it was about knee deep, and I think my knees come up. Yeah.
It's an incredible story, and it's an amazing thing to read in the Bible and then just piece together what we know from the archaeology of how it all fit so that God was able to protect Jerusalem against this enormous evil empire that was trying to take it over. Okay, now let's fast forward out of the Old Testament to Jerusalem in the time of Jesus. So what you're looking at here is a model that's been built of Jerusalem as it would have existed in about the time of Jesus. So you can see where the walls are, right? And then over here, especially on the right, this enormous structure here is the Temple Mount. We're going to take a closer look at that because so much of the action in the New Testament is happening there, right? So there's the Temple Mount now looking from an eastward direction. So you've heard me talk about this before, right? What did I tell you it was? I think it's about a 30-acre plot. This was built by Herod the Great. So Solomon built the first temple there, and then under Ezra, when they returned from exile, they rebuilt the temple that had been destroyed. But that was a pathetic little structure. Herod the Great was the one that built this enormous thing. How long did it take him to build it? It's over 70 years. It was under construction for over 70 years. But you can see enormous walls. There's the portico. See the columns? That's where the rabbis would go in and teach. So when it says Jesus went and taught in the temple, can you picture him coming in there and just finding a park spot somewhere and people gathering around him? He starts to teach. This is the court of the Gentiles. So all the Gentiles were allowed in here. There were steps on the other side that you used to get up to this complex. And this here is closed in. And when you come in here, this was called the court of the women. So no Gentiles were allowed inside of here. You'd be killed. Then the Jewish women could get in here, but then there's another court inside, which is the court of the Israelites. No women could go in there. And then inside this taller structure, the temple proper, only the priests could go in there. And then inside of there was the Holy of Holies. And only one priest could go in there one time a year. Do you see how the whole structure is designed to restrict access? Do you see what that conveys? How getting in to see God is like getting in to see my admiral when I was in the Navy, right? You have to go through all of these hoops. The transcendence of God is conveyed by the structure itself. How holy He is, how far. You don't just knock on God's door and go, hey buddy, I was hoping to talk to you a little bit. He's God. Before you understand His immanence, His love, how close He is to you, you've got to have a sense of how far He is from you, how holy He is, how set apart. This is a picture of the Temple Mount now looking from the south. So you see how high these walls are? And then here are the stairs where people would come in to get into the complex. This is now up in the northwest corner of the Temple Mount, and this is the Antonia Fortress. So this is the fortress that was added on where the Roman garrison would stay. So where were the Roman soldiers? Right next to the temple, always close by, because if trouble was going to happen, that's where it was going to happen. Here is here's a downward-looking view of Jerusalem again. So you can see the wall here, and that's the wall that encircles what's called the Old City. It's all Jerusalem, but that's what's called the Old City. But those walls are not in the same place as they would have been in the time of Jesus. The city's been torn down and rebuilt, through after wars umpteen times, right? But this section here is kind of where the Temple Mount would have been. And so you can see the valley as it goes down on this one side. And then the ground slopes over here. Actually, this sloping ground over here, it's not the highest elevation, but it's still elevated, and that's where Hezekiah's city was, probably, because that's where the spring would have been, in there somewhere. Let's take some more looks at this. So this is the Kidron Valley. So that valley I showed you just to the east of the Temple Mount, this is the valley sloping down and then going up. And I'm going to show you a picture of the Mount of Olives. So on one side was city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. On this side is the Mount of Olives. So when we read about Jesus, especially during Holy Week every day, staying in Bethany, which is about 2 miles east of the Mount of Olives, and then walking every day to the temple, what's he doing? He's walking to the Mount of Olives. He's walking down this valley, and he's going up the other side of the valley every day. And you could imagine on Palm Sunday, right? He's riding that on a donkey. Yeah. Yeah. And going all the way down and all the way up. And that's quite a parade, isn't it? There's a picture now looking westward at the Mount of Olives. And you notice there's a lot of greenery over there. Here's another picture looking westward at the Mount of Olives, but from a different angle. There's an olive tree. So the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus went and prayed Thursday night before he was arrested, somewhere on the Mount of Olives. We don't know exactly where it is, I don't think. But there are still olive trees there. Now, every time one of these armies came through Israel, what did they do? That you cut down all the trees, right? You're trying to destroy your enemy. So the trees in there have been cut down, who knows how many times. But one of the neat things about certain trees, like the olive trees, is you can cut it down and it'll sometimes put up a new shoot and it'll start to grow again. So look at this olive tree. Olive trees don't get that tall, but look at how wide that the stem is there. So this tree, well, not this particular one, but my mom showed me one probably just like it, that they think was probably cut down and grew again, and cut down and grew again, and all of that wood just kind of gets big and scarred, but it's very possible this tree is 1,000 years old. So some of these could be very, very old. Okay, now, Jesus is taken prisoner in the Garden of Gethsemane, brought to the high priest's house, brought to Pontius Pilate's place, which was probably, Dad, you could correct me, probably be in the Antonia Fortress there, right? Pontius Pilate's palace. I think that's where it's got to have been. And so then he's sent out and he's crucified. Remember, he's crucified outside the city walls. So there's a question about where was that exactly? So this black border, that's today's old city. Remember the city at the time of Jesus, it was smaller. So there are a couple of possibilities. One is around here. The other one is up around here that I want to talk about, just because it's just interesting. So this one is the one that I pointed to that's further north, and that's called Gordon's Calvary. So there was a British General Charles Gordon. Have you ever seen the movie Cartoon with my favorite actor, Charlton Heston? My favorite actor. You haven't seen the movie. If you ever get to see it, it's
movie night.
Yeah, hey, it's worth watching. So this is a true story. General Charles Gordon was a British general, a larger-than-life figure, a really interesting, fascinating man. In the movie Cartoon, he dies at the end, as he did in real life. But he spent a period of time in Jerusalem. He was very interested in Christian things. And the way it was explained to me, he was up on the roof of the Spafford house. The Spaffords are the ones, he was from Chicago, and he was the one, remember the story?
He wrote the hymn when he lost his family at
Right,
sea.
yeah. He was a big businessman, and his wife was taking their 4 kids to France, and their ship hit another ship, and it sunk, and the wife survived, and the 4 daughters all died. And when he was on his way to France to meet with his wife, the captain told him, as near as we can tell, this is close to where your daughters died. And so he wrote the words to the hymn, Peace like the river, and the sea billows roll. Very powerful, moving stuff. Well, then he eventually moved from Chicago to Israel, and he got a place there in Jerusalem where he had international guests coming all the time. And so General Gordon stayed with him. General Gordon's on the roof, and he's reading the Bible, he's doing calculations, and he's looking at this place. He says, I think this is where Jesus was crucified. And take a look at this next picture, which is this, just looking at it from a little bit different angle. That's a little closer. See that? What was the name for Golgotha? The place of the skull. Yeah. You see the skull?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, since then, people have said that soft limestone, it's probably been cut away a lot more from what it was 2,000 years ago. So it probably didn't look like that. So that is not conclusive evidence. But Gordon thought this was the place. And then look over here. This is just right around the corner from it. There's an ancient tomb dating back to the time of Christ there. And so the idea there is that it's so close to Golgotha. And remember, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. The thought is maybe this is the tomb, the Garden Tomb. So if you go to Israel and you take a tour bus, they're going to take you to the Garden Tomb. And it really is a very meditative place. There's flowers, and you can just see it. It's very interesting. Problem is that the scholars think that that's probably not the place. Like so many other tourist places, right? It's stories arise over time. There's more thought that the tomb is actually the first place that I showed you when I had the map of the tombs, the one that was further south. And that would be under what today is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And this is an interesting place. It's this enormous church complex, and different areas of the church are controlled by different religious groups. So there's like a dozen Orthodox groups. You've got the Serbian and the Russian and the Greeks and the Syrians, and they all have different parts. And I guess every once in a while they even get into spats with each other, and their monks come out and like smack each other with brooms and have fights. But it's a huge tourist trap too. When you go in there, it's all fancy, like kind of an Orthodox church, and there's candles and there's all the little trinkets that you can kiss and all that. But a lot of people think that the tomb that was the actual tomb of Christ may be inside this building. I don't know if anybody today really knows for sure, but it's fascinating stuff. It's fascinating to see it. So Jerusalem is a wonderful city. If you ever get a chance to go, you should definitely go. Here's the old city. You get a sense of that old feel. Here's a picture of the wall from the west side. Now this wall would date to the Middle Ages probably somewhere, but there are ruins and things like this all over the place. This is a very famous wall. Does anyone know what this one is? Yeah, the Western Wall, or what's commonly called the Wailing Wall.
Wailing, that's us.
So the stones at the bottom would probably date back to Herod's temple. But remember what Jesus predicted? He said, not one stone shall be left upon another. And sure enough, by 70 AD, only a few decades after Jesus had ascended into heaven, the Romans came in and utterly destroyed Jerusalem. Well, what happened? As I mentioned, it gets rebuilt. So the stones all get knocked down, so they take them and start stacking them up again. You can almost see it when you look at it. It's interesting. I mean, the stones at the bottom are these huge, 20-ton stones. How Herod got them there, I'll never know. And then they get a little smaller as you go up, and then you get to the top, and they're this big. So there's all different levels depending on when it was constructed. But the wall itself, its foundations, and it's still very old, but the foundations go back to the time of Christ. And because it's so sacred, this is where the temple was. This is where the Jews, the Orthodox Jews, will come oftentimes to pray. So that's why they call it the Wailing Wall, right? Because they stand there and they wail as they're praying. And they'll write their prayers on a little piece of paper and stick them in the cracks of the rocks. And you can see there's a barrier there. It's women on one side, men on the other side. Don't mix that up. And there's other places where they're still always doing archaeological excavation. So they're still digging and they're finding things and always discovering things. By the way, you've seen it already in other pictures, but that big golden dome thing on the other side there, does anyone know what that is? It's the Dome of the Rock. So that's a Muslim mosque, and that is the third most holy site in the Muslim religion. It's said to be the place where Muhammad ascended into heaven. So since that's a very holy place for them, look what it's right next to, the most holy place for Jews. So you see why there's always contention, there's always trouble. They're right on top of each other. This is just a quick shot of a village. So this is outside the old city. This is Yemen Moshe. But this is where my mom lived when she lived there for a year. So those houses date, if I'm not mistaken, to the end of the 19th, early 20th century. So they're very old, but they're stone. They have those tile roofs. This is like a uppity neighborhood, an upscale neighborhood. Very expensive and wealthy, nice place to live. And you can see the windmill in there. There's a store. I just love this stuff. And I had to put the bread in there. You know, when I was there with my mom, and we were outside one morning, and a guy's coming with a big, see all that bread, it's on a big cart. He's taking it somewhere. And some guy comes and he's got like a big thing over his head all filled with bread. He's bringing it to the restaurant at the King David Hotel. And my mom stops him and says, "Can we buy some bread?" The guy's like, "Sure." He sells some of the bread. Best bread you ever ate. It's the most fantastic stuff. It's a great place. And then there are gates and all around Jerusalem. So as I understand it, if I have this correct, there are 12 gates to the city of Jerusalem mentioned in the Bible. There are only 8 gates now in the old part of the city. But studying the gates of Jerusalem can be a fascinating thing. This is the Damascus Gate. So which way do you suppose this would face? Which side of the city is this on? Damascus is there's Jerusalem, Damascus is
So north?
the north, right, so this is on the north side of the city. This is the Jaffa Gate, so here's Jerusalem, and Jaffa's over here, so this would be on the west side. Yeah, see, you're picking this up fast, you're all getting A's in this class. This is the Dung Gate. I guess they call it that because that was where they would remove the manure. They take it out this gate and dump it down the side of the valley. This is Zion's Gate. So this would have been facing Mount Zion, close to the temple. And this was also the site of very heavy fighting in the 1948 war for Israel's independence. So you see all those holes in those are bullet holes. And this is the Golden Gate. So this one is facing the east. So remember I showed you the pictures of the Kidron Valley and the Mount of Olives. This is on that side, facing that direction. But of the 8 gates, what do you notice about this one? It's all walled in. So during the time, I think, of the Ottoman Turks, when they controlled all this, they bricked it all in and put, I'm told, 16 feet thick of concrete in that gate to block it off. Why do you suppose they do that? I don't know this for a fact, but this is what I was told, and I find it very interesting. It says in the Bible that when Jesus returns, he's going to enter, he's going to come down on the Mount of Olives and enter Jerusalem from the east. So the east gate is blocked off. And you see what's in front of it that you probably can't make that out. You know what those are? those are tombs. Here's another picture. This is on the side of the Mount of Olives. You know what that all is? That's cemetery. 70,000 graves in there. Why would they block off the gate and put all those tombs in front of it, and those tombs on the Mount of Olives? So I don't know this for a fact, but this is what I was told. It's so Jesus can't come back again. Because if you defile yourself if you go into a cemetery, so Jesus can't come back and walk through the graves in the cemetery to get back. So it's a way to keep the Messiah from coming. Isn't that interesting?
They don't know Jesus.
They don't know our Jesus, do they?
Because they'd be the ones that are there first.
That's right.
They see
The
him
graves
first,
will be
yeah.
open.
Yeah.
The graves will be open. It's interesting, isn't it? All right, before we get out of the south, I thought it's worth just taking a quick look too at the Dead Sea. So not as much in the Bible about the Dead Sea, but here's Jerusalem. And so the Dead Sea, I thought we should just take a few minutes to look at it very quickly. Why do they call it the Dead Sea? It's dead. That's good. I guess I asked too many trick questions. I wasn't afraid to answer.
Content
Really
is
salty?
high.
Yeah, I was thinking
Yes,
salt.
yeah, the salt and mineral content is so high, nothing can live in it. There's nothing in it.
People float, don't they?
Yes, so I went swimming in there. You cannot go underwater. It forces you to float so much. You try as hard as you can to swim and pull yourself down, and you just bob back up like a bobber in the water. It's amazing. It's the lowest elevation on the face of the earth that you can walk on. These deeper places in the ocean and stuff, but where you can walk, you can't go any lower below sea level than right there at the Dead Sea. It's the lowest spot on the earth. And why is it so dead? Why does it have 5 times the salt content of the ocean? Somebody pointed this out to me a long time ago. Because fresh water flows in, but nothing flows out, because it's the lowest spot. So if you're one of those people where you're always taking, everything good comes to you, but nothing good goes out of you, what happens? You become like the Dead Sea, right? 3 places that I want to just briefly call attention to while we're here. Up here is a place called Qumran, and here is a place called En-Gedi, and down here is a place called Masada. So you see where they are in relation to the Dead Sea, and I think this is only about 30 some miles. So it's, we see these maps, but to get a sense of scale, it's you're looking at a very small piece of the world with so much packed into it. So Qumran, up there, you see the sides of those mountain cliffs there? What do you notice? I bet you can see them from where you're sitting. They're all pockmarked with
The caves?
little caves. Yeah, there's all kinds of caves in there. And guess what they discovered in those caves? The Dead Sea Scrolls, right. I'm trying to remember, I hope I have the story right. It's been so long since I heard it, but a shepherd boy wanted to go in, or he dropped something in one of the caves or something like that, and always being wise, before crawling into a dark spot, you throw a rock in there to make sure there's no snakes or anything. So he throws a rock in and he hears cracked pottery, and goes in there, and they find all these pots with these ancient documents inside the pots. So, for example, the book of Isaiah, before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, the oldest copies of the book of Isaiah were from about the 8th century. And then you discover the Dead Sea Scrolls, and now all of a sudden you've got copies that are 800 years older than that. You realize what a great find that is, and how marvelous that is for the veracity of the Bible, to look at these texts and find out what the Bible is actually saying there, what may have changed, what didn't change. And the way it was explained to me is actually very little has changed, that for the most part the Bible has stayed the same. The copyists tried very hard to be true to what they had there. So, a very interesting place. And those Dead Sea Scrolls now are in a special museum somewhere
What year
there
were
in
they
Israel.
found, the Dead Sea Scrolls?
49? That's close. I might not be exact, but somewhere about 1949, I think. Yeah.
Pastor,
Yes, honey.
the Dead Sea looks gray.
Looks gray? Yeah, it really is. It's not clear water. There's so much salt in it. It has this grayish look to it. Yeah. Very interesting place. I also mentioned the second place that was further down in Gedi. So, even though you're in this low elevation and the Dead Sea is dead, there is a place on the side of the Dead Sea where there's a freshwater spring. So in the middle of the desert like that, there's a little oasis. And you can find trees, and this is I think it's a good picture, but I wish I'd found better pictures. When I was there, when you find the place where the spring is coming out and the water's running, it's kind of like a creek. It's not as big as like Nippersink, smaller than that, but it is a good supply of fresh water running down and going into the Dead Sea, and all around it are these reeds, and the reeds grow so thick and like 12 feet tall, you can't even hardly walk through them. It's an amazing place. There are wild animals that live there because they have access to water. There were been reports of that's one of the last places where there were leopards. Leopards now are restricted to a very small area in Africa, but there were leopards in En-Gedi up until the 1990s. I think now they may be gone, no one's seen them for a long time. But can you imagine a little oasis there where the leopards can survive for hundreds of years surrounded by all these wars and stuff like that? Amazing. And this is the place, around to show it because this is the place where, remember when King Saul was hunting for David, try to find him and kill him, thought David was his enemy, and he camps at En-Gedi, and David is hiding in the cave. And King Saul, I hope this can go on the tape, I don't know, but he has to relieve himself. So he goes inside the cave, and he's in there, and David kind of crawls up behind him quietly, and cuts a little piece out of the end of his long kingly robe. And then when King Saul goes out, and then David comes out of the cave and says, hey, look, who does this belong to? In other words, I could have killed you if I wanted to. So why are you hunting after me? And King Saul stopped his pursuit. That happened here. And then the third one, the furthest to the south down here, is Masada. So this is an overhead view, but you can see this giant mountain here, which is very flat on the top. And King Herod, who built the temple and had all these ambitious building projects, he also, among other things, had fortified this place of Masada. There's palace complex here, palace over here, and you can't see it from this angle, but kind of going down the side of the backside of the mountain, there were actually like 3 levels of palace. A very interesting place. And I talked last week about the cisterns. So they were able to capture the fresh water whenever it did rain on that flat surface and channel all that water into the cisterns so that they could have fresh water up there. And it's not in the Bible anywhere, but it's kind of a famous piece of history because when the Jews did revolt against Rome, remember I mentioned the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, so the Roman armies came in and they were wiping out all the Jewish zealots and rebels, and the last place was Masada. The rebels, the zealots had taken control of Masada. Well, if you're even the Roman army, what are you going to do? How would you attack that? How would you attack that? What would you do? So you know what they did? You can't see it really well here, but they got Jewish slaves carrying bags of rocks, dump the rocks, go back, get some more, dump the rocks, go back, get some more, and build up a hill
Built a ramp.
with a ramp, one bag at a time. Thousands of slaves building it up to get toward the top.
And they had to see it the whole time.
Yeah.
Them doing it.
Right. And they're getting closer and closer to the top, and then before they could get to the top, the defenders of Masada, does anyone remember? They said, we're not going to be captured. We would rather die than be captured. So they all killed themselves. They all took their own lives before they could be captured. Very interesting historical moment. Okay. Boy, no time. I gotta keep moving. So let's move up now to the place where Jesus did the largest part of his ministry, which was up in Galilee. And so the reason I kind of like this map, I took all these off the internet, and I tried very hard not to take anything that I thought might be copyrighted. I'm not always 100% sure. So if your pastor disappears one day, but this one I really like, even though the resolution is poor, it's kind of like a three-dimensional angle looking at the Sea of Galilee. And so you can see, for example, down here, Gadara. So remember when Jesus cast out the Gadarene, cast the demons out of the Gadarene demoniac? So that's down here. Going up this way, you've got Tiberias. And then up here, Capernaum, which I'll show you a picture of, and we've talked about that before. Oh, here's Capernaum, sorry. And Bethsaida. And one thing I like about this picture is you can see in the three-dimensional view, see these big lumps there? Those are called the horns of Hittim, two great big mountains that kind of go straight up, and they cut down very vertically. And so what happens is when the wind blows from that direction, it hits those mountains compress the wind and force it together. So you can have, all of a sudden, it looks very calm, but in a very short time, you can have storms arise on the sea. So remember Jesus was out there and they had the storms? Now you understand why if you see a storm coming, why wouldn't you just go ashore? It's not that big of a lake. You maybe don't always see it coming because it can come so fast when it comes between those mountains. So there's so much happening there at the Sea of Galilee. This is Tiberias. So remember Herod the Great who built Jerusalem and the temple? When he died, his kingdom was divided up between three of his sons, and one of the sons, Herod Antipas, had control of Galilee. So when you're reading in the Gospels about Jesus and Herod, that's the Herod that it's talking about. The Herod that wanted to question Jesus, he happened to be in Jerusalem when Jesus was arrested. That was Herod Antipas. And he built a city on the lake and named it Tiberias after Caesar, and made that his capital. Here's the shoreline at Capernaum. What do you remember about Capernaum? That was the little town where Peter lived. And so not a very big town, right on the water there. A lot of fishermen, a very, very beautiful place. And this is, I hope you can see that. This is the synagogue at Capernaum. So I just preached not that long ago, maybe just was a few months ago, but you remember the story where Jesus went into the synagogue at Capernaum and they were all watching to see what he was going to do, and then that night he went to Peter's house and he was healing people and casting out demons. And so this is the synagogue. Now, what you're looking at there is something that was reconstructed later. It didn't exist like that in the time of Jesus. But once again, as is so often true, the foundation, the stones underneath, this was built in later years on top of what was likely there in the time of Jesus. There's a full-scale model of a fisherman's boat, what Peter's boat probably would have looked like on the Sea of Galilee. And here's up in the north of the Sea of Galilee. So the water up in Syria. See, in Syria here, what do you have? These are mountains. And you get snow on the mountains. And in the spring, just like Colorado, right, the snow melts and it starts running down the mountains and it forms the Jordan River north and it comes into the Sea of Galilee from the north. You can see there, it kind of deltas out. So it's all very marshy at the north end. And then this is, down, I hope you can see it in the middle there, this is down at the south end. So at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River comes out again. So the Jordan is running from north to south, and it runs all the way through down into the Dead Sea. All right, that's it. I even finished in time. So I hope that was interesting and valuable for you to just visually get a sense of some of the things that are going on in the Bible and see how where things were and how they lived and the geography and the weather and the topography, how all of that shapes what's in the Bible and makes it come alive. So thank you very much.